listening to Make It, a podcast by Bonsai Creative that helps aspiring professionals in film get where they're going faster by dissecting the advice, knowledge, and insights of professional creatives in the film industry. I'm your host, Chris Barkley.
Hello, my name is Dr. Nicholas Quin Serenati. I'm a scholar artist and independent art cinema filmmaker. A lot of my work might be best known for research into trauma, metaphor, spirituality, and recontextualizations. And currently, I'm working on a children's book that I hope to adapt into a stop-motion art film.
Dr. Nicholas Quin Serenati, welcome to the Make It podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I'm very excited as well. And so we might as well let the cat out of the bag just to start off with. You have a connection to the Make It podcast here that is very intimate and one I was delighted to find out about. You were friends, pretty good friends, with my co-founder and co-host of this podcast, Nicholas Buggs. So let's just start with there. How did you and Nick become friends? And just let me self-indulge a little bit here, Nick.
Please.
Who was he back then?
Well, so I'll kind of wrap a whole story around it a little bit. Probably what will kind of emerge from some of this conversation is my embrace of my creativity that was kind of forced upon me growing up on a farm as an only child, having a ton of animals around me and having some land and having working parents who, really kind of said that, you're going to have to entertain yourself and really use your imagination and play. And so I used that growing up. And one of the first individuals that I met and one of the most influential and impactful to my childhood was Nicholas Buggs, or Nick Buggs, as I knew him growing up. And we just had an immediate connection in elementary school. And we found ourselves really gelling on ideas and creativity. We had a lot of the similar tastes and appreciation of particular cultural influences that we saw either on television or heard about or read about in books. And we just had this budding relationship that was really rock solid. And I was very close to him, spent time at his home with his wonderful parents and his brother Ian, and just really had a second family with the Buggs. Then, unfortunately, how things usually occur for young people and parents that work is that I had to move and move considerably far away to a whole other area of the state, which made it pretty impossible to maintain any, strong relationship, especially of a time where we didn't have like texting and the internet and all that kind of stuff. And so we had a couple episodes to where we accidentally ran into each other just because that was the circumstance. And we've had some situations to where we plan to catch up. And over the course of life, grow and change and shift and find themselves on these journeys, and when it's proper, you find that opportunity to come back again and meet up. And I think that this is really important because I've always appreciated the kind of work that Nick has always been interested in. The music and the poetry, and he was also a great soccer player. And activity was something that I was always impressed by as a young person, and it inspired me and pushed me harder to be a creative as well, the best creative that I could possibly be. And what's beautiful about the whole thing is that we get an opportunity to have a connection like this, the kind of projects that he's helping to navigate and invested in, and the kind of projects that I'm doing can somehow work harmoniously together to kind of, I think that's pretty amazing, and it's pretty beautiful. It's what makes this situation so unique and so important in my eyes.
I love that. And that sounds like Nick to me.
Funny guy, too. I forgot to say that. He's probably going to get mad at me that I didn't say that he was funny. And he had the greatest laugh. I remember his laugh all the time. But he was a funny guy. He kept me laughing.
Yeah, he's still all the things you described. So he's funny. He's great at soccer. He's actually a bit of a music snob, which I appreciate it, and still writes poetry every day. So all those things have persisted into his adulthood, and it's a big part of our connection as well.
Yes.
And it's always fun to meet someone that knows someone you feel like you know really well. For you, growing up, you battled and beat acute myeloid leukemia. So we're going to touch on that. We'll bounce around a little bit, but we'll touch on that a lot through that lens. And so I wanted to start off by asking, how has surviving AML changed your perspective on life and mortality?
That's a question, and one that has to be unpacked a few different ways. So my experience with leukemia happened at a point in my life that, you're coming out of your teenage years, you're entering your 20s, you don't really know what you're doing per se. You're trying to find yourself. You're going to college. You're doing all these things, and you think you know who you are. And then all of a sudden, life kind of throws you a curveball. And this curveball was quite prominent. And it took a lot of energy on my part to kind of figure out how I was going to navigate it. And this is such a complex thing, because it's been a part of my life. It's a part of my life for now, we're talking 20 years. And the reason why I say that is because when I first had to engage, being diagnosed and going through the illness, and there's tons of details and a narrative there as well. I was very sure and very comfortable with the fact that this wasn't going to be, my final curtain call. Like, this wasn't going to be, this wasn't a situation that was going to end my life. And so I fought to get on the other side of that. And then I remember quickly trying to figure out, well, now that you have this new lease on life and you've been given this unusual permission to do and be anything you want without restraint, because in facing something like that, there's not a whole lot of people, certainly not my parents, that were going to say, well, no, you can't, or you shouldn't do that, or go there, or study this, or be that. And they weren't those kind of parents anyway, but that certainly didn't hold them back. So in going into something like that, it was really very much about surviving and trying to restart your life quite a bit. And then I found through a lot of academic exploration, doing some work after my undergraduate work in the film industry, producing a lot of content as a director and as an editor, and in some as a cinematographer. There were certain things for me personally that I just didn't necessarily feel like I was fulfilling. And so I was making work that was very collaborative and a lot of ideas, but it wasn't speaking to this void that I had inside of me. So I went back to school, and I went to a wonderful school up in Vermont, Goddard College, which I'm very, very proud of. And that particular institute really embraced who I was and where I was, or who I was at that time, and where I was in my creative emergence, and guided me towards really embracing all the preoccupations that had kind of formed my life at that point. And And after graduating from that program and working with some incredible professors and artists, I really felt free. But I didn't feel absolutely complete with what I could do. So I went back to Union Institute University to explore the social justice lens of creating work and speaking for marginalized communities that kind of fall into illness studies. So I did all of my doctoral work around creating metaphor and recontextualizing experience, personal illness experience, for the sake of contributing to the larger canon of individuals who have done that kind of work, but hopefully finding a thread in there that was empowering and inspiring, or at least comforting in some way to others that might come across that. And then and I know we've got, a ton of time and lots to unpack. I think that the new spin on being ill and the cloak of acute myeloid leukemia, survival, is the fact that now, especially being a father, I kind of feel like this peculiar responsibility to that time in my life, because when I was in that hospital, I was so struck by being terminally ill, right? What was said to me terminally ill. And the school that I was going to, and this is an interesting little side note, I don't know if I should mention them for this, but I had to immediately vacate the school that I was in because of my medical state. And instead of getting any type of correspondence from them, or, hey, we're going to, hold off on your grades, or, hey, we're going to give you a refund for the semester, or, hey, anything like that, they sent a priest to the hospital, to Johns Hopkins University Hospital, to do my last rites, so that if I passed, then I'd be, I guess, going through the gates of heaven properly in that respect. So what kind of sits with me in that is that I watched a lot of older people, seniors, that passed away from the cancer that they had, that they were in the ward with me, or alongside me in other rooms. And then I watched people that were much younger than me pass away as well. And so I have this survivor's guilt, I guess, if you want to kind of throw that term into it, of that I have this lifelong responsibility to contribute everything, every little creativity, energy that I have, towards speaking in this vein of trauma, illness, metaphor, representation, and recontextualizing experience for those that weren't able to survive, that I saw pass away around me. And so it's a very interesting relationship that I have with the idea of cancer, and of course my personal experience with acute myeloid leukemia. If that answers that.
It is powerful. It's a powerful thing. And it kind of takes me to this place where I kind of want to know from you, and you touched on it a little bit here at the end, what have you learned about yourself and other people through your and their responses to illness? You mentioned some people younger than you, older than you, dying, and you having this guilt around it. So what did you learn about their responses to illness that you either didn't know before or know during your own health battle?
That I was at a real prime age. I was playing college athletics, and so I had an advantage of being, at the best shape of my life, and being young and being very healthy, and being old enough to somehow wrap my mind around what was going on. And what I learned is that at certain points of individuals' lives, another rock in the bag can be too much, depending on what that rock is, how much it weighs, or how many other rocks you're carrying with you. So for older people, I really learned that at some point, the end is the end. Like, you only have so much that you can really put out on a day-to-day basis to be able to keep kicking and staying alive. And the battles are sometimes so steep that it overwhelms you. And I learned that very early on. For the children, or the younger people, I was heartbroken. I was, and I'm still heartbroken. And I see their faces in these very fragmented glimpses that I remember, because I used to have to walk circles in the ward. That was my activity, right? And I would just walk circles and circles in these wards, and they would see me, but they weren't healthy enough or well enough to try to come with me and walk, to stay active and to try to fight it back. And so these little fragments of these elderly people, their faces, their expressions, their eyes, their struggle, and then the younger people who were more or less, I think, shook by how their world had changed so much, and they were trying to learn to adapt to this new situation. And they were almost deers in headlights, and they were also, there was vulnerability there, and there was this desire there to understand better, or to have some type of effective inspiration or leadership from somebody that probably wasn't a medical doctor, that was probably somebody that understood where they were emotionally in some capacity. And they were starving for that. And at that moment, I couldn't provide that, and I couldn't help with that. And so that guilt that I kind of talk about is that motivation and that inspiration to just keep contributing positive outlooks on our lives, because, maybe it's a short film, or maybe it's a feature film, or maybe it's a piece of poetry, or maybe it's a photograph, or maybe it's a children's book that really empowers and inspires a young person to overcome, or even an older person to overcome in a challenging situation. And I think that that's the bag that I carry now, and I think that's my responsibility.
You mentioned being at Johns Hopkins, and they recently published a study that found psilocybin treatment 4 times more effective than antidepressant drugs. I'm curious, have you tried psilocybin before, and do you believe it'll be viable? Do you think you'll do it in the future, maybe to deal with some of the ongoing guilt, survivor's guilt that you have?
I think that's a wonderful question. I have to say that I'm not overly informed on what that process might entail, what some side effects could be, or really, what is the situation that you have to be in to really consider that type of treatment. For me personally, and I'm going to take a little bit more of the holistic position on this, is that I think that there is, and it is kind of a tricky situation, I think that when you consider medical practice and medical treatment, there's certain situations that people need help. People need the assistance of medicine to combat whatever they're dealing with. However, I think that we can't solely rely on that. I mean, we're creatures that live and developed through narrative. We all have unique and powerful stories to share. I think it's critical that in certain settings, in any type of treatment, whether it be rehab or in cancer treatments or whatever the case may be, that there should be there should be strong protocols. And the University of Florida does a wonderful job of this, actually, with having art therapy being available to to patients to help rehabilitate, to strengthen their outlook and their frame of mind around their given situations, an outlet to express themselves and their feelings. And it can be guided by a number of different types of art practices in crafting. There's something for me about the mind and the hand working in unison and falling into that meditation or that flow, if you want to cite Csikszentmihalyi. And you fall into that flow, and I think that there is a lot of good that can be done there. And I know that doesn't directly answer your question about the two options there, but I think that we always have to consider how we can aid medical treatment with something that's a little bit more proactive and something that is a little bit more honest to the human experience.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm very curious about it, and it's something that I would consider, but so much of it has to do with what is the dose. Your experience with psilocybin is probably most correlated, it feels like, with having the right dose and then having to experiment to find out what is the right dose for you. And then also trying to do the research to find a guide that will be credible, a guide that will be responsible, a guide that is vetted, versus a guide that you think is vetted, and then you find out you have this really, really awful experience, and it's life altering in the way, in a negative way. Right. But I think as these things become more common, that'll be an easier thing to find. So fascinating stuff. Another thing that's fascinating is your title. And you describe yourself as a professor, scholar artist, and world traveler. So of those three things, which one do you most enjoy and why?
Wow. Well, I love to teach. I love the energy of the classroom and of young people that want to actively learn and actively create. And I like putting the puzzles together in their film work. So I'm an assistant professor of digital media production as well as media studies at Flagler College. I also am the director of television. So we have a Roku channel with a lot of our content on it, and probably our biggest accomplishment to date was this past year, which of course was diluted slightly by the COVID pandemic. Was that we reached the semifinals of the Student Academy Awards, which is very hard to do in general. But when you're a small liberal arts college in the South that is dappling, and you're not NYU or USC, you're up against some pretty tough odds because there's budgets and there's resources that those other colleges have, and we were able to be very, very competitive on a national stage with what we were working with. So I'm very proud of that. As a scholar artist, I just have to be really honest with the work that I make, and I've kind of grown to be not that individual that will make a creative body of work and kind of put it out there and then not speak to it. I have to speak to it. I have to unpack it a little bit. Not saying that I have to bridge, narrative gaps by any stretch of the imagination, but really kind of offer an academic lens into understanding the approach to the work. And that was influenced by a lot of my doctoral work and the wonderful professors that I had at Union, and the necessity, I think, in my professional position to offer context and to offer historical notes on where a particular body of work that I've just produced, how it sits or how it kind of represents. So that's the scholar art aspect to it. And I actually really enjoy that that particular process. And then the other side of the world traveler thing, it's kind of a benefit to the job. So I do a lot of conferences, presenting of papers. I've just been brought on to a scientific committee most recently to help curate a particular conference. And so one of the perks of the job is that you get to travel the world, and that certainly does shape your storytelling ability, and it certainly shapes your outlook on life altogether. So which one do I pick? That's a tough one. That's why I have all those commas. It's like this one and that one, this one.
Or you could pose it this way: which one brings you the most joy?
It has to be my personal work as a scholar artist, because it forces me to consider the work on both sides of my brain. And I try to really embrace the process of creation. And I do it formally in some respects. If I were to do a project that had the intent of being picked up and distributed, or I have a much more informal process to where I have to wear the hat of the auteur. But then I have to click over, because, the work is different than what you come across on a regular basis. And, you have to kind of pin it up with other people that have kind of influenced you. So I do enjoy the writing process. So I would have to say that I really do like the scholar artist, I guess, opportunities that I get from that kind of work.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. I've got some text here, and this is from the internet, so you tell me if it's wrong or right. But what I have is, as an interdisciplinary scholar artist, and defined by arts-based research that explores the potential of medium and discipline in liminal spaces. So I'll stop there and just go right into explain liminal spaces and why it attracted you so much.
So, I think what we have to kind of consider is, at least for me, right? It's all about this pathway. And we have these plot points in our life, right? These major milestones that when we're sitting on our deathbed or laying in our deathbed, and we're looking back on our life, and we're sitting with family, and they're like, do you remember when? And they hit you with these big, successful plot points of your life. I'm curious about how you got there. Like, is that really truly the success, or was all the work that you did to get to that point, was that really the success? Was that really the growing points? Did you really blossom or flourish there? So to kind of, reduce that to the point of looking at it within like a single body of work, the liminal space for me is that creative process to a large degree, and also kind of speaking about the moments in between moments. And I'll try to clarify that. So when it comes to cinema or filmmaking, I think that when you look at a lot of mainstream American cinema, they're all about these big moments, and we rush to the points. We rush to the points of those big moments, kind of like what I was saying when you're on your deathbed and people are recalling your life accomplishments. What I've appreciated and learned from my study of a lot of art cinema, feature art cinema, historically, Fellini and Tarkovsky, their meditation on the moments in between is fascinating to me, because I think that that's where a lot of our decision making occurs. And so when it comes to my particular work, I'm really trying to explore those moments in between these big bookends that are really the important proving ground, or areas that we're really learning that gets us to those big plot points, or those big moments in our lives, or those big accomplishments, or the completions of those projects, So it can be part creative process, right? It can be also making the creative process part of the end result, or in a product that we produce and we put out there. What is it that we're actually looking at, and what are we spending time with? And are we expected to just be ingesting these very, very macro ideas in between a larger conversation? And those are the kind of the liminal spaces for me personally that I try to engage and try to grapple with, I think, from one body of work to another.
Yeah, it's really it's a really topical subject to me, because and one thing I have been thinking about recently and have put into my own work is this idea of the sort of liminal space that is the internet, or the sort of digital bits between what you experience and who's providing the experience. So
yes.
if it were 1990, let's say, and I was to say I watched someone paint, you would assume I was in the room with them. But now you have to ask the question, did you see them paint on the internet,
right,
or through social media? If I said I was to watch a woman dance, you would assume I was there watching her dance, but maybe I saw her dance on her IG feed.
Right.
And that space in between, and how that changes you.
Yeah.
Because I'm experiencing something so detached, but it's very personal because it's 3 inches from my face, let's say,
right,
through my cell phone. So, it's truly cool work, and an interesting way to sort of go about one's creative sort of process. I'm going to keep reading from that same paragraph as we go into this next piece. It says, I employ video, creative writing, photography, sound, installation, and performance to investigate forming situations that direct my research around illness, experience, and metaphor. Through this intellectual practice, I deeply engage the creation of meaning, form, and function, and the articulation of story throughout my process. And so with that, I'm curious how you would describe the role that creative media forms such as photography, sound, writing, and others play in one's experience and recovery from a major illness like you had.
Right. No, great question there. So, I'm really intrigued by our place in the world, kind of what we've been, touching upon early in this conversation here, because I personally believe that, our places are constantly evolving and shifting and changing dramatically or minimally. And we're navigating, all of these places, and sometimes we wake up and we're just in a whole new place in our life, because of a trauma or an experience with an illness. So I'm very much like working with Nick as a young person. I don't think we said no to anything that lent itself to creativity, right? And I really adopted that. And I remember when I went to get my MFA at Goddard, one of the first things that I had to begin to let go is the formal distinction of being a film director, which is I walked into that place saying that, I was a film director. I needed to work more on my craft, and I needed to kind of figure things out. And like a good coach would do, right? Like good academics do, what they do is they'll break you down from these distinctions or these containers that we try to occupy, so that we can grow and blossom further. And so one of the catchy parts to that whole scholar artist thing is the interdisciplinarity of it. And the fact that I do take, photography and photographs, nonfiction for the most part, of things that, of course, matter. But, I can't stay in these spaces too long, because I feel like, not that, it's like eating too much candy at Halloween, right? You got so excited that you got a handful of fun-sized Butterfingers, and you've sat back and you've knocked 10 of them out. You probably don't want another Butterfinger at that point, So I try to allow myself to stay productive and stay creative and stay aware. Right. That's the other part of of all of this is my mindfulness and the intentionality of being constantly aware and in my moments and thinking about how one of the most incredible devices that man has ever made with these new smartphones, and always having my tool with me to stay active in recording sound, to stay active in taking said photograph if it's on the fly, recording video, or just quickly sketching out some type of poetry or prose that is inspired in that particular moment. And I've caught myself in these moments publicly to where I've been inspired by something, and I broke out that phone and I used that tool because that's what you do. And so I try to do all these things. I've played with installation, and I've played with installation with video components to it, and that is a practice that I greatly appreciate, and I'm in awe of the individuals that create these interactive spaces around us. And the performance aspect, I found myself in some of my work. I have found myself really directing and working with choreography with individuals that have had to play a part in some of the pieces, whether it is, a narration, whether it is a dance piece that is being kind of folded into a larger film work. And so what I try to do is I just try to keep myself open to what is necessary to communicate a meaning or an idea or thinking that I might have around a particular moment. And so I try to use those tools, and I try to never let the well go dry, or at least not for too long, and just keep creating as much as I can in all those veins. And I think that kind of lends itself to its form and its function. I'm always intrigued by the creation of soundscapes and what that can do for the experience for an individual that's experiencing a particular project in your meaning-making process. But all of it has to come around to story, and I think it's very important that you're constantly thinking about the narrative as a whole and how your choices in medium help translate or articulate those ideas or those stories that you're trying to share with the world, which is very, very important that you consider and weigh all those options.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about, and this touches on a little bit of some of the things you talked about in that response. I want to talk about the documentary Taking Chance. And Taking Chance is a documentary that follows the making of an original blues album for the International Blues Competition in Memphis, Tennessee. And the film follows the reigning blues band members, RJ and Eric, as they write and produce an original album for this competition in less than 20 hours. And what this reminds me of right away, just to contextualize it, is the 48-hour film festival. And you talked about a little bit about, hey, I'm a filmmaker, and going into that space. And the 48 across the nation is really the testing ground for that theory that people have about themselves. Oftentimes, a filmmaker will enter a 48 just to see, do I have what it takes? What can I do at a very low budget, high creativity? You have 48 hours to write a story, film it, put it through post, and submit it. And this feels very much like that in the way that here you are as a documentarian capturing someone that has to write a whole album, a blues album, in 20 hours. So what was that like? Why were you inspired by this? It seems a little bit outside of the parenthetical you've created around your own life. Yeah. Talk to me a little about this and how you got inspired to do it.
Okay. Well, I mean, so the Rain and Blues Band I've known for over 20 years myself, actually. I used to, I got into production of any sort by signing up to be a roadie and then worked my way up a sound engineer. And it was good times, right? I mean, you're 18, 19 years old, you're having some good times. And, learned a lot about sound and things of that nature, and learned about, dragging your equipment around a lot late at night. So the band I'd always appreciated, they were a local band in Maryland, and they had a good following, and, they were very creative and they were very inspiring, and they just had the let's do it kind of attitude. And then of course life and all of these things make us kind of go different ways and follow different paths. And then one day, I got a phone call, particularly from RJ, and he said, "Listen, I've got a little bit of resources, and I've got this studio space, and I've got this really talented guy, Eric." And it wasn't the original Rain and Blues Band. RJ had moved, and, he was trying to keep it up and everything like that. But he said, the one thing that we never tried to do was compete in any real competition. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to see where this is going on this. And he said, listen, we're going into the studio and we're going to dapple and we're going to make a song and we're going to submit a song, singular. I said, okay, this sounds interesting. All right. And it was the summertime. I didn't have anything currently really on my plate, but I'd always appreciated these guys and the work they did. And it was happening in Gainesville, which was about an hour and a half from where I was. And I was like, go in there into a cool studio, set up a few cameras, kind of document it, talk to them, just kind of see where it's going. Nothing else, it would be a good exercise, right? And so we get in there, and not a whole lot of talking really occurred with me, which made it wonderful. I mean, I was actually feeling like we were making some type of, truly objective nonfiction piece to a degree, and how objective can nonfiction be? That's a whole nother conversation. But the mid 20th century documentaries, I'm, a fly on the wall, and I'm getting some really authentic conversations happening here about their creative process. And I probably think that that's what the draw in for me is because I was really in my own head creatively, in trying to think through a lot of the research that I was doing. And I think I needed a breath of fresh air that didn't necessarily overly connect me. So we're in there and we're making this one song, and the song sounded really, really good, and I was like, okay, this has something to it. And then all of a sudden, in the weirdest thing ever, they said, well, let's make another one. Like right there on the fly. Like, we don't have lyrics. We didn't have anything scored. We didn't have it composed at all. There was nothing. And they were just cranking out this work, right? Without any restriction, without a producer in there saying that's not going to work, or this could work, or this or that. And they were really leaning on themselves. And then it became that we were if I remember it correctly, like 7 songs in. They basically created this short album in what was this marathon of creativity. And it was in the most unsuspecting studio that you could possibly imagine in Gainesville. As a matter of fact, I didn't even think I had the address right. We were in there, and they were just making music, and I was really just capturing it. And there was something that was really quite inspiring, because here are these older gentlemen that were at the apex of their happiness, right? And I think that says a lot, right? Because a lot of people have asked me about that particular piece, and and how well did the album do, and all that kind of stuff. And my first reaction is I kind of shrug, because I'm like, I don't know what their sales have been. I don't know certain answers to some of these questions. But what I will say, though, is that it was a very unique experience in capturing these individuals who had always been trying to achieve acclaim in their craft. right? And they're coming from a little bit of a different school of thought than I am. My measure of success and my measure of true contribution is going to be different probably than the majority of the general public. So their persistence on just trying to craft something that was going to be commercially relevant and important was there. I mean, that was the motivation, but what emerged was this incredible environment of pure creativity to try to make something new, interesting, and special. But right, with anything, there is some drawback to rapid fire production, right? I mean, there's drawbacks to the 48-hour film festival. In the sense that you do cut, you sharpen your teeth, you cut your teeth on that. But you don't have perfect sound per se, maybe, or you didn't get perfect cinematography per se, or the writing could have been better, or any of these things. And I think that
exactly
that's part of the process, and it's really how you respond to that. So they didn't win the competition, just to kind of let the cat out of the bag on that one. But
I think that question is beside the point.
It is.
I think that as a musician myself, and knowing a lot of musicians and seeing how musicians I don't know sort of react, the whole point is about what happens when you are in flow state and you are alone in a room, or you're with a bunch of like minds. And you see this kind of happen in incubator spaces all the time in technology. It's like what happens when you put a bunch of Elon Musks in the room together, right? Like, so you put a bunch of musicians in the room together and you let the magic happen. I used to write 20 songs a day and people couldn't believe it. They're like, but I'm not talking about writing lyrics. I'm talking about lyrics, music, composition, harmonies, everything. And so that was because there were no distractions. I had no interruptions. I would be alone in a room in an apartment, and I would just be me and my workstation, and I would just do it all day long for pure joy. And so I think that question anyway is beside the point. The point of the whole thing is to watch this process actually get documented and filmed. And it's a process that just doesn't happen on tape, a whole lot.
Right.
There was a time before the world of COVID, Nicholas, that you traveled quite a bit. You've been to Athens, Istanbul, Palestine, Jerusalem, Budapest, Hungary, Bali, Indonesia, Portugal, just to name a few. And so I thought you would have this unique perspective on what is the most underrated place to film.
Oh.
Or maybe I could rephrase it, if you don't want to say underrated, the most beautiful place to film that you don't see normally considered by filmmakers at large?
Wow. That's an interesting question. That really, really is. So all the places that I've never been asked that question. And so you got me on a really good one here to really kind of roll back, the memory here and try to think of these spaces. I mean, all of these spaces were really incredibly special to me and beautiful in their aesthetic for very different reasons. And I wished I had spent time in a couple of them, in particular, especially in the moment, because of the social and cultural impact that I felt while being there, especially from a documentarian's point of view. That would be certainly going to Egypt, and being in Cairo was a very unique experience, especially outside of the city of Cairo, where you really got to understand the forming situation of their population outside of that downtown area. But as far as the most interesting, wow. I'll tell you if you can do it. If you can do it and you can pull it off, I can imagine what the permits would be like. But Prague was incredible. The Czech Republic overall, because flying into the Czech Republic, you start questioning really what you got yourself into. And then in a short car ride, you're pretty much downtown Prague, which is literally at every turn of the corner is almost a new century of history. And so these buildings and these looks are just so unique and so beautiful. And to be honest with you, if you ever had to film at a zoo, I stand by the fact that Prague has probably the coolest zoo in the entire world, because it all takes place on a mountainside. And you literally have to pretty much scale this mountain to look at all of the exhibits. So that's a really interesting place. Budapest is certainly beautiful, especially, because there's two different sides. There's Buda and then there's Pest. And the older side of Buda is where I stayed, which has more of the classical architecture and everything. And that's a gorgeous area. I'm trying to run through a couple of these in my head. Turkey is a wonderful location. Istanbul. What's interesting is when you go to a lot of these cities, like a regular metropolis, it's very concentrated. And, like we see in a lot of films, there's a lot of tight spaces, and those tight spaces, I think, bring a very interesting tension to the screen. And you have to, utilize that in the proper way, because, too much detail, too much action going on in tight spaces for too long of a time can be too much for your audience to kind of digest. Right. So you have to know how you economize your space along with your scene construction. But to go back a little bit more now, I'm really trying to pick out off the top of my head. I'll have to say really quickly as a side note, Greece was wonderful. Greece was a beautiful place with incredible history, but I was dreadfully ill in Greece. And once I was actually able to physically do anything, what it was a Greek pizza that saved my life there. And it since then has been the best pizza I've ever had. But I'll tell you probably Mykonos. Mykonos now jumps to the forefront of my mind. That this little island that sits in this beautiful, beautiful sea, and it's just these white structures with these white pebblestone roads. And that is probably one of the most fascinating places that if I were to say, okay, let's shoot a film and we can pick anywhere in the world. I like small to be able to help tell the story. One of my favorite films of all time is an Icelandic film called Rams, which is a fascinating piece. But, that really inspired me to go to Iceland or go anywhere in the Arctic, to be completely honest with you, and explore that concept of just nothingness or extreme minimalism and photograph something of that nature. So, I've been blessed and fortunate to travel to a lot of places, and everyone I could certainly think of a unique story that could be told there. So, I recommend if you have a chance of shooting in any one of these places to seize those opportunities.
Well, we can speak to Iceland directly. One of the films we were involved in and helped get made is called Another Version of You by the brilliant Maki Depp, and produced by David Perry and Ryan Hartsock, who were great as well, and was shot by the wonderkin Micah Sims. And some of the best shots that we got were these sort of, like you said, isolated, minimalistic, sort of long view shots in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and just added so much beauty and poignancy to our film that we were telling about a guy who's traveling around the world to find love. So I can definitely agree with you on Iceland for sure. What advice would you offer to this audience with regard to creative self-expression?
Keep unpacking as much as you possibly can, because, I think that our living experience, our souls are a very deep well. And I think as you begin to descend into that well through your creative practice, you have to be open to the fact that as you first went in, it may not be what is needed to keep being creative and productive and expressing yourself at the midway point. And this can be contextualized in a lot of different ways. Of course, for me, to take a trip to Iceland, like we were just talking about, and to go out there with the anticipation that, I was going to, shoot a nature documentary or something, right? Something that I could really fall into. That quite possibly halfway through the process, that's not necessarily, the best creative version of the research and the work. And so you have to be open to what is best going to help express these moments. Now, to go out and to make a film and to put that kind of thinking into the same film, I think that you have to be open to what it best expresses a scene, the development of characters or situation, the motivation of characters and the intention, and really be open to what is necessary to move these pieces around. My wife and I, finished the Queen's Gambit, and I think one of the most important points that kind of came from that was this ability to be flexible and to shift and change in the heat of moments the best way you possibly could. Are you always kind of putting your chess pieces in the right area? So as I tell young people, young filmmakers, student filmmakers of mine, as they're going out there, it becomes this very interesting scientific or intellectual process of determining how your film should, or at least your scene, and then to the greater point, your film, how it should open and how it should allow your audience to connect with all of the topical moments as well as all the subtextual moments and thinking, and what is best going to help complement those things. So flexibility, and certainly persistence to keep digging deep and exploring and trying all the things that you can to be a better creator and storyteller.
That's wonderful. And so many recommendations flowing in the last 2 weeks for the Queen's Gambit.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, everybody absolutely loves that. So I will definitely be checking that out soon. Slightly related question. At a conference in Jacksonville, Florida in 2005, you presented on the topic, the independence of independent filmmaking, and how do you see, well, actually I should say, let me start that again, because I flubbed there. At a conference in Jacksonville, Florida in 2005, you presented on the topic, the independence of independent filmmaking. And so my question to you is, how do you see the current state of independent film?
Wow. Well, it's just since 2005, and certainly before. I mean, the concept of independent film, and let's be clear for your listeners, slightly, being an academic here. I mean, there's a fair argument to be made that independent filmmaking, to a large degree, has been around, since early cinema, to the point where, when you start looking at film directors such as like Fritz Lang and even D.W. Griffith, when they were having issues with their production companies and studios, and they didn't necessarily see eye to eye on all of the creative aspects in the film that they were producing, that the studio would threaten to pull money and to pull funds, and some of these individuals had enough resources to be able to keep the production going as they, saw fit. And if you look back on those films, one of the biggest indicators of their independence from the studio within the intertitles is the eloquent framing of those titles. And if you notice at the arc of the framing of those intertitles, they would put their initials. And their initials was this big, back at you at the studios, that we didn't need your help to necessarily make the story that we wanted to make. And of course, then the dynamics of the industry were much different. But we've had independence for so long, and it's been evolving, and it's been shifting, and it's lost, it has lost momentum in the 20th century for a multitude of reasons, and then it gained back up. And a lot of people, give a lot of credit to Quentin Tarantino as being that flag bearer, and certainly somebody that really kind of pushed forward. But I think we also have to consider all of the individuals that have made short films, made a career out of short filmmaking, and how the industry has embraced independent filmmaking. So when I spoke about the independence of independent filmmaking, it was certainly at the time to where technology was becoming much more affordable across the board for anybody that wanted to be a storyteller, that you weren't necessarily being overly bound by having to raise money to rent out these extraordinarily expensive packages per se, that for a smaller amount of money, to go digital and to do all these things and blah, 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 you could really kind of get your story told and get it out there and have that one business card floating around the film festival circuit, and then begin working on the next and get it going there. So where it is now is, I think that, okay. So I think now what we've done is we've commodified the concept of independent filmmaking quite a bit. And I think that the independent filmmaking, it all depends on what kind of team that you're bringing with you. If you're bringing a team that's like, we're going to do it our way, but we still have all the intentions of playing ball with the big studios or big distributors and the industry itself, then I don't know if you're really independently making film per se. Okay. What I do think, though, is that you are resisting certain process that is going to either bless your project or kill it, in the pre-production aspect, because no one wants to bite on your story, right? And that's a kind of a dangerous line, and a lot of people don't want to be held to that. A lot of people believe that in independent filmmaking, and this is somewhat unfortunate, to be honest with you, is that you can rush through the pre-production process, and that somewhere in production or post-production, you can salvage a body of work to be a great body of work. And that doesn't necessarily happen. And so I think that,
almost never happens.
Right. Yeah. Right. I was trying to, I was trying to be general there, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it all comes back to story, and it all comes back to holding a really hard line and measure for your to be determined process of the filmmaking process. And that comes with having a great story, that comes with having the proper resources in place to be able to help you execute that story, having the right team with you, having the proper casting with you, and being set up in a scenario that if something happens in production, be it X, Y, and Z, that you have another plan. Or being in post-production, if X, Y, and Z happens, what is our contingency plan at that point? All of that occurring in pre-production is vital to a film's success. But see, we're so much smarter now and informed now, and have seen certain successes occur than in 2005, that I think the conversation has shifted and changed. I think that really the independence of independent filmmaking is holding a better, more rigorous standard than what Hollywood is giving us across the board. Because many people complain that when you look at a lot of Hollywood cinema, we're kind of being treated as an audience that is not really well informed and loves sensationalism and can be easily entertained. And as long as Hollywood feels like, and these are all generalities, as long as Hollywood feels like they can crank out that work and still make money, then there's no need to necessarily, recraft the whole process. And I think that that's the importance of independent filmmaking, is because those individuals are holding a different standard, very much like our counterparts in Europe and abroad, who really, really spend the time, not so much on fancy camera work, not so much on a whole lot of glitz and glamour that you can do in post-production, but really telling a very, very powerful story and really working the actors to give the best possible performances. And that standard, putting work out there like that raises the bar for everyone across the board, that if you're going to go into the business and you're going to produce work that is going to compete, then you have to have the advantage. And the advantage is being a terrific storyteller and then allowing the rest of the craft to accentuate and punctuate the idea of the story.
I love that. Completely agree. And I want to thank you so much for what has been a truly brilliant conversation. Tell this audience where they can find you on social media and on the internet, and maybe where they can see your work if that's out there.
Yeah, certainly. So you can visit my website, NQ Serenati, NQSerenati.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Dr._NQS. Those are pretty much the two platforms that I'm really kind of working in for the most part. And you'll see some of my film work on my website. And yeah, that's where I am.
That's perfect. And I'll leave you with this. The story is that your dad saved our good friend and co-founder of Bonsai Creative and co-host of this lovely podcast, that your dad saved Nicholas Buggs' life, saved young Nick's life. What do you remember about that?
Wow. That's a tricky one. Did he just phone that one in?
No.
Did he just phone that one in?
No. I totally shut everything down when I'm having these interviews. I'm all yours.
No, I'll have to be really honest here. Nick's memory, I'm sure, is much better than mine. I suffer from short-term memory loss because of my chemotherapy. So there's a portion of my early childhood that unfortunately is very hard for me to access. When that is mentioned like that, if I had, that does trigger something for me. And I'm trying to recall it and piece it all together, but it doesn't necessarily come together for me right now. And I greatly apologize. That's really, truly sad for me. And I'm sure Nick can tell. No, because, I love these things. And the fact that this was even brought up, I'm sure, is a hilarious story.
Well, apparently he had a bad reaction to your mother's horses.
Oh, okay.
And because he's asthmatic,
Yes.
that he almost his body breathed in the horses and said, "Oh,
Yes.
his body said nay."
Right, I remember that. And Nick never came back over to my house after that. And so we kind of see how it all kind of
He won't come back to my.
Listen, I love Nick. I love Nick, and there was no way that we had any intention with horses to put that young man in any type of dire strait. But I can see why he never came back over. It makes complete sense.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, he wouldn't come back to my house until I got hypoallergenic dogs. Yes. So I have golden doodles now. So now he can come and doesn't have to get a hotel when he's in town. So thank you so much. That was great. And I appreciate it. And sounds like you and Nick have a conversation you guys need to have.
Yes, we do.
Again, got to thank you for the brilliant conversation. I hope we have a round two at some point in the future. Would certainly be a yes on my end and hopefully on yours as well.
Thank you so much for hosting this. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure. I really appreciated it.
Anytime. Take care of yourself and someone else if you can. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Certainly so. You have a good one, Christopher.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Make It podcast. To find more information about this week's topics, including links to relevant blog posts, projects, and indie creatives, please visit our website at www.bonsai.film. If you haven't already, you can join our podcast community on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice by searching for Make It Bonsai Creative, and the show will pop right up. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Bonsai Creative and Facebook by searching for Bonsai Creative. And of course, if you're looking to take a big step towards your filmmaking success, go to www.bonsai.film and click on Book Us to schedule a free discovery meeting and needs assessment. You have everything to gain. Until next time, be better, be creative, be engaged, and thank you for listening.